So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. I'm David McCann with BCX Design and Happily.ai. So I am an applied behavioral science researcher, and I work with organizations to help produce happier, more engaged employees, and also to help businesses better understand their customers and how they make decisions. I'm very fortunate to be joined today by Martin Sørensen, the CEO of WorkMate, which is a Thai business which provides end-to-end staffing solutions. So Martin's unique USP is to formalize the informal workplace through the use of an excellent suite of technology. So Martin, thank you so much for joining me today and for agreeing to talk a little bit about what's happening in the market today and what you're doing to adapt.
Thank you very much for the invitation, David, and thank you for telling everyone about WorkMate. It was pretty spot on. I probably couldn't have done that better myself.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. It's possible that I might have had to do a second take of that, so thanks.
Who knows?
So today's conversation is really quite straightforward. I want to understand, by and large, three things. First, I want to understand, what is WorkMate doing today in response to COVID? What opportunities have presented? What have you had to change? Has your product roadmap had to be altered? This kind of stuff. I just want to get your take on what you've done to cope and thrive in this environment.
I think we are lucky in the sense that the business is relying heavily on technology. So we have been fortunate compared to the more traditional offline players in the market that provides staffing solutions. Internally, what we've changed is more the operation side of the business. The tech has provided the support for us, but any sort of training, onboarding, and interviewing has changed completely from being a face-to-face thing that is happening in our office and recruitment centers to something that is now 100% digitalized and happening online. We are obviously using different technologies to execute on that. In Thailand, there are certain applications that workers are more familiar with, so we are of course tapping into these and utilizing those on a daily basis. But overall, it's a complete change of a face-to-face onboarding training session to a session where we onboard hundreds of workers every single day using live streaming, using video calls, using basically any technology available in the market as of now.
So I've got a couple questions on that. So I think the first, many of our viewers are going to be maybe a little bit less familiar with the informal work environment or work sector in a place like Thailand. So could you give us, one or two examples of the types of roles that you're talking about?
Absolutely. I think I want to divide it into two primary roles, right? So first of all, we are supplying warehouses, logistic players, e-commerce players with blue-collar workers. That would be the warehouse workers, the pickers and the packers. And then on the other side, we have, we could define it as fresh grad first jobbers, which would be looking for jobs such as data entry people. It could be call center functions. It could be customer service. For the blue-collar worker force, I think that's where we've had the biggest struggle, or where we have found that a bit of work need to be done in order to get that executed upon that online. However, I have to say that if you had asked me a month before COVID, I would have told you that it would have been impossible to onboard a blue-collar worker on a video call. Now I've changed that. Now I've changed my mind completely. We are onboarding warehouse workers on video calls every single day. Of course, there's a dropout with X percentage, but it's relatively low. For the other first jobbers in the admin roles and call center roles, I think we are close to 95% on a daily basis who tells us that they want to participate in a training or onboarding session, and they will also complete that session by the end of the day. So I think we've been quite surprised in terms of how relatively easy it has been to implement this online onboarding of the roles, which is like the lower tiers in the market, right?
So maybe speak to the concern that you had. So you were basically forced into digitizing the onboard for service and manufacturing and what I call gig economy kind of jobs. So you'd had a let's call it a hypothesis or a thought before that it wouldn't work. What did you do to overcome that problem?
I think, you know, what happens in any business is when you have an SOP which has been implemented based on some ideas around how a blue collar worker would normally behave in the market, then you are kind of stuck by that perception. So what I mean is that we thought that blue collar workers, they wouldn't be able to join a line call. We thought that blue collar workers wouldn't be able to use Google Hangout. We thought that blue collar workers, they would find it too complicated and they would rather use the traditional source of recruitment, which would be call their friend, show up on site, start working immediately. But during these times, we saw that, you know, unemployment went up for these groups, and then they actually became more, I wouldn't say more tech savvy overnight, but at least they were willing to engage in these kind of onboarding sessions compared to before, where we were facing them face to face. So I think it's just a matter of, you know, sometimes daring and trying to implement technology instead of being bound by how things has always been done.
So did anything about your, let's say, your user interface have to change to accommodate this kind of worker?
No, I think it's more about planning and structuring how things are set up. When you deal with blue collar workers, it's very, very important that there is a clear roadmap in terms of like how the screening, onboarding, and training process will flow, and that has to be told upfront before something before a call starts. So I wouldn't say that we've changed anything. The screening questions remain the same. Our onboarding deck remains the same. I mean, we have changed it slightly. A few details has been changed because normally we would do the onboarding on a big screen with 50 people in the room at the same time. Now workers are sitting on their own phone, right? So we have to adapt to the fact that it's mobile only, right? But it's minor changes. It's really minor changes. It's more about planning and structuring everything so the worker knows upfront, what am I getting through from step 1 to step 3. Pre-screening with a recruiter, onboarding with the trainer, and then finally a training session so they know what will happen next.
So it sounds like what you did is you said, I don't know if this will work. I was hesitant to try it before because I didn't think it would work. I was forced into it because COVID. And when you actually started doing it, all you really discovered was, hey, if I map out how this whole thing works really clearly and communicate well, then I don't really have to change that much. So that's
correct.
That's really encouraging.
Yeah, it is. And I think, I actually think a lot of businesses nowadays, they will see that things that has kind of like blocked them from testing out new technology, they will see now that they're forced to give it a shot simply because of the conditions in the market right now. They will find out that it is not that complicated. I think at least that's a conclusion that we have made, that things can be done. And it's just about, you know, making these very, very small adjustments to how things were done previously, right?
So basically what you've said is one of my next questions was going to be about the employees, but you've partially answered anyway. So one obvious change that's present is blue collar workers are more comfortable or willing to do the completely remote interview process, and potentially that's just because there's no alternative. But have you noticed any other changes among the workforce here? Any changing expectations, for example?
Yeah, I mean, we do see workers looking for options where they can work from home. We have also had clients asking for for us to build sort of like remote workforces. It's very much aligned with our business model, basically. The difference is just that normally we would make sure that all our workers would be sent or show up at client side. Instead, now we're just making sure that productivity remains the same, even they're working from home. Obviously, the fact that transportation becomes more difficult, there's actually a curfew in Bangkok right now, starting 10 p.m. every day, every night. That means that if you can build and create and make sure that efficiencies are the same in a remote workforce, there's a lot of clients who find that interesting. And more importantly, workers find it really interesting. And that's simply because they're saving hours of transportation on a daily basis, right? Hours that they would, use in BTS and traffic jams, taking the car, being exploited to, pollution and all that stuff, right? So there's a lot of upsides to this as well. And the total workday actually becomes shorter, right? You don't have to travel 1.5 hours to go to work and the same going back home. And you're making the same amount of money. So that's a positive side effect that we're seeing as well. We're testing out with a few clients as of now to build a remote workforce for them. But I foresee that in the future, this is definitely something that will grow as well.
So what kind of businesses would want that kind of remote workforce? What industries?
I think there would be in the future potentially a lot of industries. Right now, we see the demand coming from the industries that is thriving during COVID. So obviously anything related to e-commerce, logistics, food delivery, grocery deliveries, etc. It doesn't mean that it's only limited to those kind of businesses in the future, but that's where we see the demand now. It could be anything from customer service to call center chat functions, content, data entry, stuff like that. Yeah, things, cool. Positions that would normally they would normally be working in an office, right? Taking up office space, traveling long hours, and these positions are always paid, like let's say in the lower end, meaning that they would spend a significant amount of their net income on transportation. So for them, it's a real benefit to have the opportunity to work from home and making the same amount of money.
So final question, alongside a shameless plug that I will have to make, I'm sorry. But you'd mentioned productivity is one of the pieces of the puzzle, one of the KPIs that your customers would expect you to shoulder if you're going to build these remote teams out. Have you found any particularly common challenges to productivity growth, to keeping productivity high when people are working from home?
It's still too early for us to really draw any conclusions on that. And also the fact that we are looking into monitoring KPIs is not necessarily the request from all customers. Very often they actually do have a team of team leaders or QC people in place, and they would be monitoring the productivity of our workforce. In some cases, the clients are asking us to do it, and then it's for us to build SOPs around that. I think you can basically ask yourself the same question, right? It comes down to how good are people at working at home, and at the end of the day, that's about bringing structure, proper planning, and the right communication tools in place, especially for junior people. If that is done, I don't think it's more difficult. But these things need to be in place. You can't expect a first jobber to be working from home and be 100% efficient if you don't have a team lead checking in on daily KPIs, if you don't have a proper process in place, because they're left alone, right? So there needs to be that engagement on a daily basis. That's of course needed. Yes.
That's largely what we share as well. I mean, we know that more frequent conversations are important when people are isolated in this way. And I think COVID is just reinforcing the point that if you don't see other human beings for prolonged periods of time, it has an impact on your state of mind, and that obviously impacts your productivity and your happiness. So we found a few interesting statistics that I think might be interesting to share with our audience. There are two very simple things that HR leaders and team leaders can get right today. The first one is, when we went and surveyed we surveyed 5,000 of our customers out of our database. And what we learned was what people who are working remote need and what they want. What they need is transparency around some very boring stuff. They just want to understand what is the work from home policy. It's very low level stuff. If your remote working people want to know things like, what's the vacation policy now? If I need to take a day off to go take my kid to the dentist, what do I do? What if I'm sick? Like, what if I don't know, hurt my leg and I need to lay down all day? Not COVID related stuff, but it's very basic. So your HR leaders, if they can put together a type of communication, which I suspect is already there, and get the message out that says, these are our HR policies as they relate to the work from home. That's one small, very silly, but small source of anxiety that we can remove. The second is more of an employee want. As we begin to navigate workflows at home, we're all new at this. It can take anywhere between 3 and 6 months for habit formation to cement. And we're, in most cases, in Bangkok as well, I think we're maybe 5 weeks into this? 4 weeks?
Yeah.
I don't even know anymore. But these workflows that we do every day may not be as optimized as they could be. We may discover that, touching base with our employees every day is a really big task for a manager to do if let's say his team is 20 people. It may eat up his entire day to do that. So employees may discover as they navigate through their 9 to 5 days that, wait, there's probably a better approach, maybe a better tool. And I think the last piece of the puzzle from a needs and wants perspective is fairly simple. Listen, there are, to go as basic as I can around psychometric testing, 2 kinds of people, introverts and extroverts. And what we've learned through our surveys and our insight is the extroverted people, if you want to say it that way, are not responding the same as process or introverted people. So we need to be mindful and a bit more empathetic towards those quite often sales and marketing and HR folks, that they're potentially dealing with a mental load that is tough for them. And so talking to those folks, giving them opportunity to see and be seen on videos like this, running little competitions, like how many push-ups can you do, like little silly things like that, can be a really great exercise to help people maintain their strength and their sanity, frankly, during this period. So that's my shameless plug for the day. I hope that was useful information for people.
Absolutely, man. I mean, we're already exploring different versions of that. So of course, from an HR perspective, we are trying to, make sure that different personalities are taken care of in the company. We can already see now that some are more or less born to working during these COVID situation, and others they have to learn, myself included. It hasn't been that easy for me. I think the first couple of weeks I was also kind of like thinking, when are we getting back to normal? But I think that whole thing about, thinking about getting back to normal, I'm not sure if that's ever going to happen again. I do think that we will return to office, but we might not return to office in the same way of how it was before. With other words, like it doesn't necessarily mean that we were going to have the full team in the office every day, Monday to Friday, from morning to evening, right? I actually do think we've learned a lot here, right? And a decentralized workforce can be very efficient. You just have to be aware of who's really comfortable working this way and who needs to be supported and guided. Yeah, exactly as you said.
On that point, I do have a data point for that, and I think we can close with this. What we've learned is this is a combination of primary research that we've done alongside some studies that have been conducted in Silicon Valley. What we found is the employee that is happiest is the employee that can come into the office once a week. So
really?
Probably echoes
only once a week, yeah?
If you've got an extroverted person who doesn't really work that well, being isolated and sitting from home and not being around other humans, that person can be made really happy with that once a week check-in. Come into the office and see the peoples on Fridays. Go for lunch with them. But Martin, thank you so much for giving me some time today to talk about what you're doing and the great work that you've managed over the past 4 or 5 weeks. I'm sure there'll be great things to come for WorkMate moving forward, and for you, of course, as well. So thank you so much for today's call.
Thank you, David. Thank you for having me. Pleasure.